Over the years, one of my great challenges as a leader has been the dynamic of anxiety, my own and the anxiety of those I serve. Too often in the past, anxiety has been an engine that drove my leadership activity. So that's why I was so grateful when I came across the book, Managing Leadership Anxiety, Yours and Theirs, by Steve Cuss. I read it on a recent international trip and found it packed with wise and practical counsel for my journey with anxiety, as well as for helping leaders like you with the same dynamic. So I'm glad to be able to share a recent conversation I had with Steve about his important book on today's Unhurried Living podcast. Reading from the back cover of Managing Leadership Anxiety, Steve Cuss asks a simple question. Does anxiety get in the way of your ability to be an effective leader? Is your inability to notice when you and those around you are anxious keeping you stuck in chronic unhealthy patterns? These are the questions Steve seeks to answer as he writes. Steve Cuss is the lead pastor of Discovery Christian Church in Broomfield, Colorado. He teaches leadership development classes and conducts self-awareness seminars in the United States and internationally. Steve and his wife Lisa and 2 sons and a daughter live in Broomfield, Colorado. It was a great pleasure to meet and have a conversation with Steve, and I think you'll enjoy our conversation. Well, Steve, it's great to be able to have a conversation with you about your recent released book, Managing Leadership Anxiety, on the Unhurried Living podcast. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. I always love to begin a conversation with an author by learning a little bit about the journey along which this book came to be. You know, some of that may be about how you came to some of the insights you write about, or even what that writing journey was like. I'd love to hear some about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the short story is I grew up in Western Australia, unchurched, didn't start going to church until I was a teenager. I came to the United States for my theological education. I got a Bachelor of Arts in Preaching and Bible. And great college where I went to. And then kind of out of necessity, I needed a job for 1 year while my wife wrapped up. We had just gotten married, and it felt at the time coincidental. I know it wasn't coincidental, but the local teaching hospital was hiring its annual slate of chaplain residents.
Oh, boy.
So for any folks who are unfamiliar, it's called clinical pastoral education.
Yeah.
And it's essentially the equivalent of a medical residency for a ministry student. And
wow.
I was 24. It paid just enough for my wife and I to get by. And boy, that year just ended up being the most transformative year of my ministry life for sure. Because I went into chaplaincy with some natural leadership gifts, some natural upfront gifts that I'd been affirmed for. And that had created in me what I now call young leader syndrome, just a young white guy that's spent his teenage years and early 20s always being affirmed. You don't realize you have a shadow side. You don't realize that working a room is not always the right thing to do. And so very quickly, I just ran smack into the end of myself. You know, as people are grieving, you can't work the room. Sometimes you can't even speak to it. And so that was really the beginning of my journey studying the nature of leadership anxiety. And it was quite humbling as a young affirmed guy to realize that a lot of what I did was out of my own anxiety and not actually to help other people. And that really comes to bear when you're with someone in grief. A lot of what you say, a lot of what you do, it's actually to take care of yourself, even if you're not aware of it. Yeah. So after that, I went to grad school. I studied a whole bunch of family systems theory, and it's a long story, but I've been a lead pastor for 14 years. And that leap from an associate role to a lead role was another big leap for me in realizing I have more and deeper work to do if I'm going to survive and thrive in ministry. So the book was kind of born out of that whole journey.
Wow. Well, it sounds. I love when books grow out of someone's life experience. I always think that's especially important and helpful. I'd love to hear you talk a little more about leadership anxiety, maybe especially as it relates to what sounds like a big part of your work is you come alongside leaders to help them address their own anxiety in the context
Yeah.
of leading, and also addressing how anxiety arises within the communities that they lead.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, anxiety is obviously a big word, and it's a buzzword today, which I think is great. I'm really grateful that people are taking it seriously. Leadership anxiety is really the term I coined that really is just rewording what's clinically known as chronic anxiety.
Oh, sure.
So in the world of family systems theory, chronic anxiety is simply a false need that you have that when you don't get it, you get anxious.
Mm.
But your body cannot discern the difference between a false need and a real need. So if you're driving down the interstate and the person in front of you hits the brakes, that's acute anxiety. You actually might be in danger.
Mm.
But for example, if you're in a meeting and you don't know what to say, and then you feel exposed, your body acts as if you're under threat, just like when you're almost in a car accident. That's chronic anxiety.
Mm.
And I personally think that chronic anxiety or leadership anxiety is the number one reason for burnout in leaders.
Mm.
We get confused. We say that burnout, is to do with workload. Man, almost every leader I know likes a big workload. We kind of get motivated by having a big task. Leadership anxiety is what causes us burnout. Is that one more critical email that just presses on you, or that one more mistake you made, that you can't recover from. That's what leads to burnout. And that's all based in leadership anxiety, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like that very much. I think, in our experience, I think we see the same thing in terms of burnout, that it's not that the engine is being used too long or too much. It's that it's not being well cared for.
Right.
And that's a different matter altogether. Sort of along this line of anxiety, that one of my favorite lines, I remember once hearing Dallas Willard say, that if it could be done in anxiety, it could be done a lot better in peace.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a great line. And I've been living with that in my own journey with anxiety for a while now. How might it be that peace within us, or peace among us in the communities we serve, would contribute to a more fruitful kind of environment, or a more fruitful approach to leadership?
Oh, yeah. That's such a great question. In family systems theory, peace would be known as differentiation.
Aha,
And
yeah.
and differentiation is simply the learned skill. It doesn't come naturally and it doesn't come quickly, but it's the learned habit of noticing when you're getting anxious and being able to contain it so it doesn't spill into other people.
Mm.
But also noticing when other people's anxiety spills into you. It's basically the ability to be less reactive. I think the challenge for leaders is, Dallas, you look at a guy like Dallas and you think, well, he's just better at it than I am. Or some people would say, he just had a personality that was kind of this monk type, Yoda type thing.
Right.
But I think probably what's actually true, I bet, and I wish we had an opportunity now to ask Dallas, he's obviously passed away.
Yeah.
I bet he fought very hard to cultivate the kind of peace he exhibited.
Yeah.
And that's been my experience. And so my theology of anxiety is pretty straightforward. I think anxiety invades our soul, and it occupies the same space where we are aware of God.
Yes.
So you can't be full of chronic anxiety and aware of God at the same time, or at least it's very difficult to do it. And the way that you know you're anxious is when you're suddenly feeling like it's all on your shoulders.
Yes.
And so the journey I move through to peace is I try to pay attention to that belief. Then I try to name out loud, sometimes to someone else, what is it I believe I need that I don't really need? Because chronic anxiety is almost always born out of a false belief of need. So in my case, it's usually one of about 10 things. One might be someone's misunderstood me, or they've misascribed motives to me that aren't accurate. That'll get me anxious. Not knowing what to do gets me anxious. All kinds of stuff. So if I can name that, and then it's the recognition. I think you do move into prayer. It's the recognition and the confession that it's not in fact on my shoulders, and it's not even true that God's just with me. It's also true that God is already at work in whatever situation I'm anxious about.
Yeah.
So if I'm about to head into a meeting, or boy, when I was a chaplain, if I'm heading into that room and I don't know what's about to happen and I'm anxious, just the little prayer, okay, God, you're already in that room. You're already working.
Yeah.
I don't actually have to do anything. I just have to walk in and pay attention to you and these people. And that's how I find peace, but I have to fight for it for sure.
Yeah. Well, one of the images I've been using for myself, and I find myself sharing it when I'm with other leaders, has been this image of Jesus inviting us into a yoke. And in that, one of the contexts, he's saying, "Are you tired? Are you burdened? Does life feel heavy?" That's paraphrasing. Come to me. I'll show you how to rest. And then his strategy is a yoke, which is a work image, not really we wouldn't immediately think of that as a restful.
Right.
The idea that yoke might be an image of our collaboration with him, our communion with him, a sense of the with Christ, with God reality of my living and of my leading. That's part of what I hear you describing too. It's learning that one of the ways I remember Dallas unpacking how he did this was it was just a Psalm 23 thing. The Lord's my shepherd. I'm not going to want.
Yeah.
And that I gathered that was a practice for him that was fairly regular.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
Well, obviously this is, the Unhurried Living podcast. So we're always keeping our eyes open to ways that, those that we're interviewing and interacting with intersect with this theme of ours of hurry. And so I think as I listen to what you're saying, and as I read your book, what you're describing is really very much the opposite of the quick fix or the kind of, leadership hack kind of thinking. Can you talk a little bit more about why it is that, what you're proposing in your book, you even talk about it, maybe feels like a longer way to do things.
Yeah.
How it is that it's so much more fruitful to take a path like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Great question. I think, society is getting faster and we're becoming more efficient and more productive. And I think that's becoming more and more toxic for faith leaders because God has not changed God's ways. God is still agricultural. We're technological and we're efficient, but God's slow. And it's funny, when I first got to this church, I had a lady so angry at me when I said, God's a slow-moving God. And she's like, God can move at any pace God wants. Sure. And also God moves slowly. And all of the metaphors for spiritual growth in the Bible are agricultural. And this isn't original with me, and I'm sorry I don't remember where I heard it, but I remember hearing a guy teaching on, he's like, look, it takes all 4 seasons of the year to bear fruit, but fruit is only born in one of those seasons.
Yes.
But if we're not bearing fruit year round, we feel like a failure. So yes, the work that I propose is slow. In my church, it's an 8-month class. We intentionally go slowly because it takes a while. Some of the concepts I'm presenting, it just takes a while to get your mind around them and to try them on. I almost didn't write a book because I don't believe you can read your way to transformation. I think you have to behave your way to it.
Yeah.
And so in our class setting, it's more of a lab. People are trying things on every time we get together. That takes time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, as I read, one of the features I think of your book is you really have tried to, collect a lot of, I suppose, some that are more personal tools and some of them more interpersonal.
Yeah, that's right.
Talk a little bit about that strategy of that being a major part of what you've ended up writing in the book.
Yeah, that is intentional. I think leadership is all about leading yourself and being aware of yourself, but it's also about being very aware of the group. And of course, because the group is made up of a bunch of individual selves, boy, group dynamics get complex really quickly. And I think it's very helpful for a leader to understand that anxiety is always contagious in any group. And oftentimes the most anxious person in the room is the most powerful person in the room. Everybody's anxiety ends up taking care of that anxious person. So there's some really powerful tools a leader can use to pay attention to what's going on in a group And that, again, that's not original with me. Murray Bowen is the founder of Family Systems Theory. And he was a psychiatrist in a psychiatric institution. And he was treating individuals with paranoid schizophrenia in 1952, 1954, I think it was. And at that point, all the thinking was that the paranoia was just within the person, but he would pay attention to Sundays when parents would visit, and he'd watch the interaction between the parent and the son. And that's when he realized, oh, wow, pathology is not just in us, it's also between us. So I'm intentionally trying to give people tools to help you notice what's going on in you, but also to notice what's going on between you, because I get triggered by certain personalities, and I used to think there was something wrong with them. They're this way, but that obviously it's that wiring that's triggering something in me, and I can care for them better, and I can lead them better, or be led by them better if I'm aware of my part of what's going on in our dynamic, for example.
Yeah. Well, so, as you talk about how you've drawn on family systems theory and the interactive reality of some of the dynamics that happen inside of us, it seems to me that'd be an especially important thing for leaders in a North American or maybe Western context who tend to be rather individualistic in the way they think about their lives or developing their capacities. And maybe a lot of us as leaders don't give a lot of thought to the interactive realities of what's happening inside of us.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I write about. We spend our time focusing on content, what people are saying. But the real power comes when you pay attention to process, which is the way people are relating.
Yeah, I really appreciate that distinction.
Yeah, it's powerful, and it takes a while. I used to wonder. I wonder if it's just a gifting and a wiring that can pay attention to process, but it's not. Anybody can learn it. It's more that it's just an unexercised muscle. And once you start to pay attention to process, you'll never see your group the same way. So, for example, if you have folks that have a team, your viewers and listeners, they already know who on the team always has the meeting after the meeting. It's always the same people. They already know who is the first one to speak up in a meeting, who speaks over the other people, who never speaks unless they're called upon.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easy for a leader to understand it through the lens of marriage. Family Systems Series started out as relationship counseling. I'm just in the stream of many people that took it off the therapy couch and put it in organizational leadership. And that's not novel to me. There's a lot of people that do that. But let's go to marriage counseling. A good systems theorist is less interested in what the couple's fighting about and more interested in the way they fight, because the way they fight is predictable and chronic and repeatable.
Yeah.
And if you can work on the way they fight, then what they fight about will dissolve. And so even if your listeners and viewers are parents, already you can start paying attention to the dynamic in your family. Which of your kids is the most anxious? Which of the parents do they go to first? These are repeatable chronic patterns, and every organization has them as well. If you've got people in your organization, you're in predictable patterns. And I should just say, not every pattern is toxic. A lot of our predictable patterns are healthy, and that's what make our culture great. So I don't want to make it sound like every pattern's bad, but toxic patterns are the ones that if you're stuck in a pattern and you're attempting, your solution to the pattern is try harder, or your solution is more of the same, that's the sign you need to do something different.
Yeah, and it sounds like one of the great needs is to be able to, in one way or another, become aware of those patterns, and that may require slowing down a little bit and paying attention to things that you might not normally pay attention to. It's sort of your content process distinction.
Yeah, I always run into this because I'm a type A, highly driven entrepreneurial leader. As much as I write as if I'm some kind of hippie, I'm really not. And I would simply say, if you want to be more productive, do this. Stop working on the task list. Stop paying as much attention to the items on the agenda, and start noticing the way people relate in your team. You'll get further.
Yeah. Yeah. As I was reading through the book, there were a number of things I really enjoyed and underlined. One of the things I saw here, you said, anxiety shrinks the power of the gospel because it presents a false gospel. one of self-reliance rather than reliance on God. Can you unpack that a little more?
Yeah, and it's a deeper concept, and it is tricky in a few minutes, but I'll give it a
Yeah,
whirl. Let's see how we do.
fair enough.
But I think fundamentally, I believe that chronic anxiety or leadership anxiety, this thing that shows up after we don't get what we believe we need, is evidence that we're depending on our false self, not on the gospel.
Mm,
So in my life, my identity is always on the hunt for something other than the gospel. It feels like if I'm not constantly grounding myself in the gospel, reminding myself of what I already have in
yes.
Christ, I kind of go astray. I really do become a prodigal. And what that looks like for me is needing the critic to understand me. That's false gospel.
Mm,
And the way I know it is it never leads to peace. It it always leads to more worry, more effort from me trying to win somebody over.
yeah.
And the evidence of that is I use more words. I try to do more meetings with them. Just one more meeting, and now you'll like me. I'm a chronic people pleaser. I have this false need to be right. And
Mm,
that's a family trait of mine that I inherited from my family.
oh boy.
And so if somebody thinks I'm wrong, I feel a need to either defeat them or win them over or charm them, all of these
Mm,
crazy behaviors.
uh,
But the fact is that Jesus died to free me from all of that need.
yeah.
My identity is actually rooted in the cross, and I am the beloved child of God. And so I don't have to prove or earn anything. But as a leader, I think my leadership, and there is something sick about being a ministry leader that I think puts extra pressure on your identity. Because
Mm,
I think in ministry, we tend to confuse being God's employee with God's child.
yes.
Um, so I don't know if that helps, but it's kind of it's a 3-step process. You notice anxiety physiologically in your body, and then you try to name what you think you need. And then what I do is I try to die to it, and
Mm,
I try to displace it with the gospel
yeah.
to get to that peace that Willard talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Um, one of the metaphors I've I've drawn on for that for myself has been the language of John 15, vine and branch, and
Yeah,
Jesus is the
abiding.
true
Yeah,
vine, the true vine. When I'm connected to him, trusting him, to me, that's the true gospel image. Then I'm realizing I draw my life from him.
yeah,
But I have a habit of trying to abide in false vines.
yeah. That's
Those
right.
things tend to suck from me. And so your language about, like, there's always a little something more I need to do because it's not really working, even though I'm frantically trying to make it
Yeah,
work.
yeah. I think it was either Tim Keller or he was quoting his wife Kathy. He said it's kind of like when you're at a vending machine and you put the coin in, but it doesn't get all the way to the bottom to kick out the snack, and you have to whack the vending machine on the side. That's kind of the way the gospel is with me. I've got the gospel, but it hasn't sunk in, and sometimes I need a little whack on the side of the head to really get it registered. Yeah,
uh, as I was reading further, you talked about at one point that in your own life, anxiety has a tendency or primarily manifests as a spinning mind. And when I read that, I could really identify with that symptom or way of noticing. I wonder if you could talk about other ways in which anxiety might manifest itself in the life of a leader.
yeah. I do think the most helpful step when I teach workshops on this is I get everybody to name where it starts for them, even though it
Mm,
actually starts in belief.
yeah.
The way you first notice it in your body. So spinning mind, racing heart. If somebody feels like they've had 10 cups of caffeine,
Aha.
um, a tightening gut is like a nauseous feeling. And then just the clenched muscles. For some people, they say it's their shoulders. Others have said it's their jaw. But just this muscular clenching, those are usually the 4 ways
Mm.
that you can first notice anxiety. And when I teach my workshops, there's about 5 or 10% of the room will say it's all of it. Like, because I'll say, stand up and tell us where it starts for you. Because I'm a big believer in confession. I make people say it out loud. Because that's one way you get free of it is you actually, I think what the scripture teaches us to confess. Anyway, so I have people stand up, and some people will say, I don't know where it starts. It's all of it. All that means is that anxiety has a grip on them longer than they're aware of. But as you start this work, they'll actually start to notice it in the moment, and then eventually they'll actually start to be able to predict it. I'll give you an example. If I had this weird need to be the smartest guy in the room, and if I have a need to always have an answer to a question, and I'm walking into a monthly elders meeting, our elders meet 2 or 3 hours once a month, and they're coming from their work environments, and they might ask a question that I don't have the answer ready to, which they have every right to do, because they're just, for any number of reasons, they'll ask a question. My old self would have gotten defensive. If I didn't have an answer, I would have pushed on them, or that we're not talking about that topic, or maybe I wouldn't have reacted, obviously, but inside I would have. Now I can walk into the elders meeting and say, I'm the kind of person that believes the lie that I need to look smart and believes the lie that I need to have an answer. But man, Jesus died to free me. I actually tonight can be completely at peace and say, I don't know, but let me find out for you. And rather than have to react in the moment, over time you start to know your patterns, and you can actually walk into a room where you used to be really reactive and actually be calm. The crazy part of that is just the way that anxiety is infectious. Calm presence is also infectious.
That's really true, isn't it?
Yeah, and everybody can calm down. And when the leader is the calmest person in the room, you can really start to tackle some really challenging situations. You can also notice when you're the challenge. I had an elder several years ago. He was so helpful to me. His name's Jeff. And I was a younger pastor, and he pulled me aside. He said, Steve, you want to be collaborative because you don't want to be the kind of leader that just tells everyone what to do. And I appreciate that. But you're asking us as elders to collaborate on something that we've never thought about.
Oh.
And then when you ask us to give us our thoughts, we give them, but they're not thought through because we've not researched like you have and your staff has. And then you're angry at us or you're defensive. And he just laid out for me this whole pattern that I was generating.
Wow.
And if you've done some anxiety work, those kinds of pieces of feedback are a gift. You don't say, whoa, you say, thank you so much. You can actually go to your elders and repent. Hey, Jeff just made me aware of this dynamic that I was not aware of. I'm going to work on that. And I would like your help if I'm doing that, And then the people who have gone away from elders meetings feeling a little bruised in the past, they're actually willing to give you trust again. And so that's a powerful, where it can land. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love hearing you describe that. What it sounded to me like was a much more spacious leadership environment, a much more inviting, much more peaceful, much more freedom. When the anxiety is addressed instead of sort of the operating system almost,
right?
Context.
Yeah, you're just naming what everyone already knows.
Well, I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to say as we kind of bring this part of our conversation to a close about the book, or even about how people can find out more about you and your work as it relates to the book.
Oh, yeah. I would just say, I think the best gift any leader can give their organization is an emotionally healthy and integrated self. I think we're seeing all over the landscape of the Western church, at least, these disintegrated, highly productive leaders. And I just think there are too many people who are working for Jesus who are no longer following Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing a leader does, leaders go first. And the first thing we do is we actually follow Jesus. So that would be my final comment is the journey of whatever it is that got you into Christian leadership, that desire to help people with the gospel, or you should still be partaking of it yourself.
Yes.
And then, I can be found on stevecusswords.com, usual social media outlets.
Yeah.
I'd also say there are many good people doing this kind of work. Peter Scazzero is probably the most famous. I think his work is amazing. A couple of friends of mine, Jim Harrington and Tricia Taylor, The Leader's Journey, do this kind of work in a beautiful way. Anyway, there's a lot of ways to get access to this kind of emotional and spiritual integration. And I'd be happy to be helpful, but there's lots of great resources as well.
Well, thank you so much. Steve, it's been good to hear your heart. It's been good to hear some of your story. I think our listeners are really going to benefit from this podcast, but then also from reading the book that you've written, which is, again, Managing Leadership Anxiety, Yours and Theirs. So again, Steve, thanks so much for your time. It's good to be with you.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
I hope you found our conversation as helpful as I did. I encourage you to go and get a copy of Managing Leadership Anxiety for yourself. In fact, if you'd like to download a couple of sample chapters, you can do that on Steve's website, stevecusswords.com. Scroll down a bit and you'll see a little sign-up form titled Free Chapter Download. If you'd like to explore the topic of anxiety further, you might enjoy going back to listen to episode number 27, A Secret for Reducing Anxiety, or episode number 70, Peace as an Operating System. If you're a member of our Unhurried community, you'll be able to see the video version of my conversation with Steve, as well as having access to some bonus content that came right after our podcast conversation. If you'd like to learn more about this resource and others in our Unhurried community, head on over to unhurriedliving.com/community. You'll gain access to monthly training videos, guest interviews, and we'll connect you in a members-only Facebook group. We hope to see you there. And so, as always, we love connecting with more and more friends like you who want to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better.